Hello and welcome to this second video in the City of Mandurah Waterwise Verge Workshop series. I'm Chris Lampard of Mandurah Native Gardens. Today we're talking about reticulation in the garden. How to set up your verge with reticulation if you want it. So this is the first question you should be asking yourself is, do you actually need to put a reticulation system in your garden? For me it comes down to a question of time. If you've got the time to water your garden with a hose by hand over the summer, probably once a week, then I would suggest that you don't need an irrigation system. To hand water you'd be using a hose at most once a week over the hot period of the year, over the summer. You'd be going out just watering your plants. This is good for a number of reasons. One, you spend a lot more time in the garden, plus you get to know the plants a bit better, you can see what's growing well, what's not growing well, you can choose where to put the water when it's needed. And of course you can do some weeding while you're out there as well. So I like to hand water if I've got the time. And of course some of you will be too busy to fit that in, and so you will want a reticulation system in the garden. So when it comes to putting in a reticulation system, a lot of the traditional Australian systems involve pop-up sprays, which you will have seen spraying water quite a lot around town, and often they blow the water out onto the road, and this results in significant water wastage. So around about 50 to 60% of the water which comes out of one of those pop-ups can be wasted, can be blown away from the garden on a windy day and gets lost. So they're very inefficient in terms of water usage. A much better system is to use a drip irrigation system. And so I'm going to show you how to install a drip irrigation system by converting either an existing pop-up system, if you've got one of those off a retic controller box. If you haven't got an existing system, then how to run from a tap, an ordinary garden tap, and install the system from there. So the method of installation is generally the same for both of these, it's just how you connect to the source of water. So drip line is just an ordinary poly pipe. It's often brown. There's various brands. I've got one here which I'm going to show you. And the way it works is it's a poly pipe, and then every 15 or 30 centimeters there's one of these drippers. So it's seen on the outside as just a hole. I've got one here, so you see it's just a hole. But then I've cut this piece of tubing open, and you can see inside there's a plastic assembly here, and this lets the water drip through. And this is dripped through at a controlled rate. So this is drip line. This is a 50-meter coil here, and this particular one has drippers roughly every 30 centimeters. This drip line will deliver water at 2 litres per hour, so relatively low. So when you're using it, you need to run it longer than you would your normal pop-up sprinklers, which seems a bit counterintuitive, but you actually get less water going out overall. At the beginning of summer I'd run this for about 30 minutes per watering day, and as it gets hotter you can take that up to 40 minutes per day. Because the drippers are located every 30 centimeters, that means that we're going to lay it out along the verge. You're going to get lots of different stations. Each watering station will deliver water out to about a 50 centimeter area, so about this much. So you're going to get coverage pretty much where the line is going. Personally I like to lay the line along where I'm going to be planting. I don't try and cover the whole lawn, I just have rows of planting, because my plants are typically going to grow out to 1 meter, maybe 2 meters across. You don't need complete coverage of the whole verge, just the lines which you're going to be planting along. Because there's stations every 30 centimeters, it means rather than water just being at the plant roots, they're going to be a lot across the verge. And what that does is it means there's more water available for the plants, and that encourages the plants to spread their roots over a bigger area, and ultimately leads to stronger plants than just watering at the base of the plant. So in terms of using drip line, it's really important to understand that this does all the work you need it to do. There's no need to drill into this and make additional holes. There's no need to put other drippers onto this. It's complete in what it does. So in terms of timing of when are you going to do this in terms of your project, obviously you're going to spray out your lawn, and there's going to be putting plants in the ground. They're both time defined. You want to do the spraying out first to kill the lawn, and then the planting needs to be done sometime May, June, early July ideally. As early in the season as you can, that's as early in winter as you can. In terms of putting down drip line, you really don't need the drip line up and running until the summer comes. So if you're not ready to do the drip line, just hold off it, kill the lawn, get your plants in the ground, and then when you're ready you can put the drip line down. In some ways that's better, because if you've already done your planting you already know what your garden's looking like, and it makes it easier to decide where you're going to put your drip lines down. Or alternatively you can lay your drip lines early. The only thing I would say about putting down drip line too early is It can be a tempting target for thieves. If you've got drip line laying on your front verge and somebody fancies taking it, it's very easy for them to see and it's very easy for them to take. So you might just want to consider that. I've never seen it happen, but the possibility exists. So this is the section on how to connect the retic up to a regular garden tap. So we've got a garden tap down here. You can see got the tap, got a splitter on it already. And the first thing we want to do is put a timer on. This is the timer here. Obviously you're going to use this to control the flow of the water to the garden. This one's programmable. You can use a non-programmable one, but then obviously you've got to come out and turn it on. Programmable one's probably better. So the first thing you need to do is screw the timer onto the existing tap, like that. So the timer is your first thing, and then the next thing we want to do is then run the water away from here. Now the important thing is the water coming away from a tap is going to have too much pressure for the drip line. So if you use it at full pressure, it'll eventually blow the drip line or blow one of the pipes going to the drip line, and of course that's not good. So what we're going to do is put this little device here in. So you buy this as a single unit from a hardware store, and what this is a pressure reducer on the top. This reduces the pressure of the water down to a level that the drip line can accept, and that will be specified on the drip line that you buy. And then this piece here is a filter. You don't really need a filter for tap water, but if you're using bore water you definitely need a filter. I still put the filter in because, you know, it's included in the unit. You might as well put it in. It's only going to cost you an extra like $10 or $15, and it's going to filter the water. So this flows on the side of it here. You can see it's got flow. It flows from the pressure reducer to this outlet here, so the water's running this way. So this end, the pressure reducer, is going to be attached to the bottom of the timer. So I hope you can get down low enough to see this. So you see on the timer here we've got a thread there, and I'm just going to thread that pressure reducer onto there. Just screw that up like that. Obviously I'm going to tighten these junctions all up. If there's any problems with them, you can use a little bit of that white plumber's tape just to wrap them around and get good seals there. We'll be checking all that at the end. Okay, so now you can see down the bottom here what we've got is the pressure reducer, and you can see this is coming virtually to the ground in this case. It depends where your tap is, but it's usually going to be down about there. So now from this end I'm now going to want to run this out to the garden. To do that I'm going to use black poly pipe. This black poly pipe is very cheap. It's a lot cheaper than drip line. It's much better to use this to carry the water to where you want it, and then only use the drip line to water where you actually want the water to go. Now you can see that this assembly is coming down at a slight angle. If this was coming straight down, what I would do is use an elbow like this. So I've inserted this elbow in here, and I would use that elbow down there to run the water that way. Because this is already at an angle, I'm just going to put poly pipe on there and just let it curve through to go down to the garden. So to put this on here, I'm just going to, the best way to get these things to connect together is to wet them slightly. Now, personally I just spit on them because I'm out in the garden, but if you're a bit politer than me, you might use some water. So I'm just going to, excuse me. So I've got a bit of spit in there, and I'm just going to push this onto here. I'm just doing this quite carefully because obviously this is all assembled. You might want to do that first. Anyway, right. So I've got that on there. Now the important thing is whenever you make one of these junctions, whenever you join two pieces of pipe together like this, you need to put a clip on. This is a 13mm pipe, so this is a 13mm clip. So I'm just going to put this clip onto here. And you can see I've put it on loosely, and I like to use a pair of pliers just to pull that nice and tight. Just going to support this unit while I do it. So you heard that kind of clicked in a few times. That's made that clip nice and tight now. This piece of pipe will be fine. And then what I'm going to do is take this pipe and run it down to the garden. Once this line is all set up and ready to go, what I would do is dig a trench along this line, and I would just put that poly pipe under the surface. Or if I'm going to put wood chip in this piece of the garden, I would make sure this pipe was weighed down or pinned down with some pins, and then put the wood chip over the top of it. At this end we've got the pipe coming through, and you can see now we're onto the verge. This is where we're going to start laying the drip line from. That's coming up at the end of the video. So to lay the drip line here, got a nice end, probably cut it back here. And then this is the end which I'm going to start running my drip line from. Put a T-piece in here and then the drip line would snake off from there. So connecting into an existing pop-up system. So down here you can see we've got one of the pop-ups. I'm going to run my retic system for the drip line from this pop-up here. Now I've chosen this one because it's well away from the verge. This is in the centre of the garden, and so there's very little risk of anyone driving a car over this if they come up onto the verge, very little risk of anyone tripping over it out here, and it's just well out of the way of everything. If you know where all your pop-ups are, that's fine. If you don't know where they are, you're going to have to search for them. Best thing to do is put the retic system on and see where the water's coming out. If you still can't find them, the thing to know is when these are laid, they're laid using white poly pipe. White poly pipe can only be joined with right angles. So when you're looking for this, find one that's already there. You can dig down, find which way the pipe's running, and then you can guess where the next pop-ups are going to be. So they're going to be in straight lines, usually running parallel to the verge. They're only ever going to turn at right angles. Okay, so what have we got down here? Well, this is going to be a pop-up which is on a riser, and that riser is going to be screwed into a fitting like this down there in the ground. So we're going to have to deal with these in one of two ways. For ones which we're going to use for the connection, we're going to put a join in here which we can run our pressure reducer and pipe from. For the ones which just have pop-ups in and we no longer want them active, we're going to need to blank these off. So in each case we're going to need to dig where there's a pop-up, remove the existing pop-up assembly and either blank it off, and to blank it off we just use one of these caps here and that will screw into there. And for the one where we're going to be putting the pressure reducer on, we're going to need to find it, unscrew it and then put a pop-up assembly, a pressure reducer assembly onto here. Okay, so one thing it's useful to know, and a tool it's very useful to have in these situations, is this tool here. You can just buy one of these from a hardware store, they're very reasonable. If you don't need it all the time, you may be able to find someone who's got one. If you get into a situation where one of these has broken off or you can't remove it, this tool is incredibly useful. It pushes in the top, you can put a lot of pressure on it, and then you can use it to turn those pipes out. So this is an incredibly valuable tool for removing the unwanted stubs of these. I'm just going to demonstrate this on this piece which I've got here because it's simpler than trying to video into the ground. So what I've got here, I've got the blanked off ones here where the sprinklers used to be, and then I've got this one here which I'm going to want to replace. So the pressure coming through this system is going to be high pressure, and I've said this before with the tap, but just in case you haven't watched that piece, what we're going to need to do is to reduce this pressure for when we come into our drip line. If you try and run your drip line on the pressure which is coming out of this, it's going to burst the line at some point. And so what you need is one of these things here. This is a pressure reducer at this end and a filter here. You only really need the filter if you're using bore water. Tap water is usually clean enough, but it's worth keeping it in there because it just makes sure that you don't get particulate matter into the drip line. That can block the drippers up. This pressure reducer is usually you reduce them down to about 100 kilopascals. You'll see these in the hardware store. Check what your drip line that you've bought needs and then buy the appropriate one. Now you can see this one is set up here with a female coupling, which is for use of on the tap, that's screwed onto the bottom of the tap timer. What we need to do is change this so that it can take poly pipe, and the way I'm going to do that is using one of these. Now again, these in the hardware store, sometimes they're a little bit difficult to find. You might have to search for a while, but you will find them, I promise you. And this just screws in here as though it was the bottom of the tap timer, and so you can see by screwing that in there, I've now got a place where I can put poly pipe on this end and a place where I can put poly pipe on that end. That one comes with the pressure reducer. And how I want to do this is set this up so that it comes as the water comes out of this down here, it will run into here. The flow goes in this direction, so I want the water coming in here and out there towards the garden. Okay, so I've got this, I've dug down and found it. What I need to do is unscrew this. And you can see then what I've got here is just a thread. And so the other thing I want to do is again use one of these. This is a slightly smaller one that fits in there. And then I'm just going to screw that into there. And so you can see now what I've got here is a connection for poly pipe. So I'm going to run a piece of poly pipe from there, and I'm going to run it up to ground level, and then I'm going to run it across the level of the ground so that I have this pressure reducing system laying along the surface of the ground. I like to do that because it's much, you can cover it over with a wood chip then, it's a lot less unsightly, and also it's less of a trip hazard. So just to make this connection, in some poly pipe. So say this was about that deep into the ground, I would just want to put a bit of pipe on there. As I've said before, you then need to put clips onto these just to hold them in place. So I'm just going to put the one on here for demonstration, and you put one of these clips on every single junction. Just put that there. Use the pliers to make it nice and tight. Like that. So then you have to imagine that's in the ground, and now what I'm going to do is use an elbow. This is one I put together earlier on, so you can see this is just a 13mm elbow. I've already connected it to some poly pipe here. I'm just going to push that into there, and so now you can see I've got an assembly which I've got my pipe running underground, and I've got this bringing the water up to the surface. Then simply all I need to do is put this pressure reducer the right way around with the flow going that way onto there. So the water's going to be coming through this pipe up here, along here, through the pressure reducer, into the filter, and then out of this end. And now from this end, I'm set up to run to my garden. So what I usually like to do at this stage is, rather than starting from the drip line straight from here, I usually put another piece of black poly pipe onto there. And again, I'd have a clip here, clip there, just to make sure that's all nice and tight. Then I might snip that off, say about there. And then I've got a nice ending, which is running on the surface of the ground. And here, I'm going to put a T-piece. And it's from this T-piece that I'm going to start running loops of drip line. So I'm going to run my drip line from this. And the biggest loop I can run my drip line in is a 50-meter loop, so I would easily be able to run enough off here to cover this verge properly. So I've shown you how to put this together just using this model here. What I'm going to show you now is actually doing this in the ground. I did it with this so you can actually see what I'm doing, and I'm going to do it down there where it's going to be a bit more difficult to see. So this is the pop-up sprinkler which I'm going to run the water system from, so I'm going to want to replace this one. So I'm just going to dig around this. So the way to get into these is to come round them nice and wide in a circle. Now the thing to watch out when you're doing this is if you hit this poly pipe hard with a spade, you'll fracture it. If you fracture it, you've got a big repair job on your hands. It's possible, but it's not very convenient. So don't go wild when you're doing this digging. Okay, so I've loosened around there. Now the other thing I don't want to do is put lots of leverage on this, because I don't want to, again, damage that. And ideally, I don't want to break this pop-up sprinkler off while I'm doing this. So I'm just going to course this. That's a hard bit. Okay, then usually what I like to do when I'm doing these is get down to the ground at this point, crouch down, got a lot more control when I'm down here. Just get that out. Okay, so now I should just point out this time, really when you're digging around the ground you should wear gloves. I garden all the time, I've got very tough hands, I like to feel the dirt, but really gloves are advisable here. Okay, so you can see now I'm scooping the dirt out using my hands because it's very soft. It's beautiful, and I can feel the pipe. Okay, that's good. Got a root down there as well. Oh. Wow, we've got a uniquely odd retic system. Look at that. Okay, so this retic, if you can see in there, has actually been set up with, we've got one poly pipe which is running this way, and then it looks like we've got, somehow the poly pipe has then been doubled back to put this riser on. This is unusual. I have to say though, I've dug quite a lot of these sort of things out, and the more you dig out retic systems, the more you marvel at the ingenuity of people who put these things in. Okay, so this is pretty simple. You can see I've got the soil nicely down. I just need to get this out. I'm hoping it's going to come easily. Yeah, so that's coming out very easily. I just want to show you though, if that had been stuck in, or if that had been broken off, that isn't unusual. Then this is where this tool comes in very handy. You can just push that in there and use that to remove this. That came out very, very easily. Now, ideally, I do want to try and avoid getting too much dirt into this at this stage. And saying that, I'm going to have an opportunity to flush the line once I've put the drip line in. Okay, so I've dismantled that assembly I was showing you before, and now I'm just going to use this just to fix up this riser here. So you can see this is just going to screw into there. Now, you just need to be careful as you're doing this not to cross the threads, just going carefully. Now, I can get that down so far by hand, but what I like to do at this stage is often use a pair of pliers just to give me the extra turn on there, just to get that in nice and tight, because this is one of the points it could leak from. There we go, you see how that's turning? Ow, that's a good way to get a blood blister. That's why you should wear gloves probably, isn't it? Okay, so I think that's going to be down enough. Then what I'm going to do is just put this riser on. Now you remember I said I want it to come up to ground level, so that's just about going to bring me there, so I'm just going to push that onto there. Put this clip back on here. So I am going to clip all these because we're going to be leaving this in the ground. Okay, that seems nice and tight. Then I'm going to put this, so this is the whole assembly that I made up before. I'm just going to put that onto there. Just push that in. I'll put a clip on there if I can find one. That's great video, eh? Man looking for clip.
I didn't actually video you watching it.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to put that on there. Just get that nice and tight. It seems a bit loose. I'll just get that nice and tight. Okay, and I'm happy with that. I can put a clip on there at a later date. So you can see now I've got my riser coming up, coming into my pressure reducer, coming into the filter, and then here I've got the point where I can run my retic from. Now I actually want to just turn this because I'm going to want to probably, actually looking at it, I'm probably going to want the drip line running from here. So I'm going to want my drip line beginning to create paths from here. So I'm just going to set this up so that this is coming back this way, and then this will be the point where I start my drip line from. Okay, so the last thing then is we've obviously got a big hole in the ground here. We want to fill this back in. I'm not just going to fill this at the moment because once this whole system is set up, I'm going to want to run it and look for leaks. So I'm going to want to have a look in this hole and make sure that I haven't got a big leak down here. So the last thing I wanted to show you in this section was just blanking off one of these other pop-up sprinklers. So I've picked this one here, it's in a corner. Obviously I wouldn't want to put my pressure reducing assembly on here because this is a corner where people like to drive over and they're going to get run over. So I just need to dig this out. So it's just going around it again, being careful. So I was a little bit cautious on the other one because there is a bit of movement in these, which suggests that the pipe isn't very deep. And I really do not want to fracture that white pipe because the repair is a terrible pain. So I'm just going to ease this out. Again, I'm using my hands rather than the spade because, well, there's concrete all around it, and also I'm just shy of where this pipe is. Oh, that's what's moving. That's okay. Well, this one's actually quite deep. That's okay. A bit gravelly down there. Should really be wearing gloves. Never mind. There it is. Okay, so if you look, if you can get in here and look, you can see, I can see the top of the white poly pipe, and I'm just going to remove this riser. I'm really hoping this is going to come out easily. Nope, that was a bit stuck. So I'm just going to take the top off. Get my little, I've got my little tool. I'm just going to push that in there. You might just give it a little bit of room here. I don't want to. Actually, again, oh my goodness. There we go. So you see, I was having to put quite a lot of downward pressure on that to get this to bite. I'm not worried about damaging the riser. I am worried about damaging that. You can see a bit of water in there. And now I've just got my little fitting in here. And I'm just going to screw that in there. Be careful not to cross the thread once again. That's quite sticky. And then I'm going to use these pliers. Can you just give me a bit of room, please? Just to do this. We don't want another foam flying instantly. And now, so I've got that in now. You can see this is nice and tight. So I'm just going to leave this hole open for the time being, because again, once everything's set up, I'm going to run the retic system and just check for any leaks. And it may well be that there's a little leak down there, so I'm just going to need to screw that down a bit harder again. And lastly, impressive blood bristler. So we're going to start laying this drip line. So I'm just going to cut into it. Just to get the bands off. Now, you can see as soon as I take the bands off, it pops. And if you're not careful, you can end up with a really nasty knot of this. So the trick I found for this is to get one end secured. So if I'm on my own, I just put it under a heavy wheelie bin or under a load of bricks. And then you reel it out from there, and then you have to spin it to try and take the twist out of it, to try and get the coil out of it, and then get it laying nice and flat. And once you've got it laying nice and flat, then it's really easy to lay. Anchor the drip line, and you can see what we're using is this really heavy pot. We've just got the anchoring this end, and now I'm going to go down there. So you can see in this line there's a coil in it, and what I'm doing now, if you can get this, is I'm just spinning it like this, and you can see how the coil's dropping out of it. I've found over the years this is the easiest way to get this line to go straight. So you see now that's actually dropped out quite straight, and ideally I can let it go and it doesn't coil all the way back up. Yeah, so that's much simpler than it usually is if you just kind of try and unreel it, and that's not in a big knot. If you just try and do it without doing this, you can end up with the most horrendous knots. Okay, so now I'm at a stage where I want to start laying my drip line. So what I'm going to do is create a loop from here, and I'm going to take it out, come round, and then bring it back onto here. Now, wide loops rather than straight runs with plugs in the end. Well, for one thing, it saves you buying plugs, but the other thing is you get a more even distribution of water by having a loop demonstration. So I've got this end, you can see it's picking up a bit of a coil on it. Just take that out, and then this stuff's so annoying to work with. Then I'm just going to plug this onto here, and I'm going to clip it down there like that. Just put that clip on, you know, securing all of these junctions. I haven't done that one there, but I'll come back to that later. Now what I want to do is start laying the line out, and to do this I'm going to use some pegs just to peg it down with. These are the pegs I'm using. I just buy them in packs of 10, and I use these initially to put the line down, but then as I put wood chip over the top of it, which I will be doing, the wood chip actually does the job of holding the drip line down, and so I then take these back out, and I often reuse them from job to job. So you can leave them in or you can take them out, but we definitely need them to hold things down initially. So I'm just going to use this one, I'm just going to secure this one here. So these just get pushed into the ground. So you can see that's now holding that there. And then what I'm going to do is start working the line coming out to form a nice loop. So I'm going to go to here. And what I find is, in terms of staking this down, is it's best to do it at the points where it's turning. Straight runs you don't need the stakes, but when you're turning corners, that's when it really helps to have these in. So I'm going to bring this out to here, and then I'm starting to bring this back as a loop. the distance I've got this drip line spread out is quite wide. In in some situations, landscapers particularly would lay the line a lot closer together. I don't lay it that close together because I'm not planting that densely. My plants are going to spread out, they're going to have 1 metre or 2 metre spread, so I'm going to put a plant here, and then my next plant is probably going to be here. So both are going to get watered by the line in this arrangement. So you can see I've put a loop in here. Now because I didn't want to coil out the entire 50 metres because I'd have been halfway down the street, what I did was cut it. But then what I'm going to do now is uncoil that second length, and I'm going to create another loop like this with a T. So that'll be laying in this area here. And then what I'll do is I'll use that T just to cut up and just join into this line here. And what we'll have is a loop, and then a join with a black poly pipe running down here into a T, and then a second loop down there. And that way we'll be sure that the whole verge is getting irrigated. So these projects, I find, they sort of evolve as you do them. And so I set out with a plan for how I'm going to put the irrigation out, I start laying it, and then you just have to kind of like move it around and set it up the way you want it. And it really becomes apparent as you begin to lay it out what to do. So if you feel like pulling out the full 50 metres and just laying it in one big long stretch, you can do that, and then you're just creating an S coming down this garden, bringing it back round and joining it back on over there. Or you can do 2 loops like this. I found this easier to do in terms of like the distance it takes to coil out the drip line. And so here we go. Now this is the reticulation finished. You can see I've put this second loop just on here. This was the first loop. That's the pressure relief valve there. And that's all now I've got all the clips on there to hold that in place. And then you can see coming around that loop, and then this is the join. There you can see the tap for flushing, and you can see I've joined that with 2 T-pieces. So the 2 loops are joined together, so I should get nice equal pressure across those. So here you can see the drip line is running. If I just hold that up, you'll see the drips going down there. So this has been running for about 5 minutes now, and you can see there's quite a bit of water coming out. Now it's running off the surface at the moment because this soil's really water repellent. But of course, once we get some wood chip down here, this is going to sort of hold things in a bit more. It's going to create a nice organic layer. And so this water, rather than running down, is just going to pool out around here. And so you can see the sort of coverage that you can get from drip lines when it's beginning to spread out a bit. And so the only other piece that you need on one of these retic systems is a tap. And you can see I've installed that here. So I've put this on a T-piece where I'm joining 2 loops here together. And this is my flush valve. So the reason you need a flush is because you may end up with some sediment in the line, and at some point you're going to want to flush it out. And in particular, when it's first been set up, it is possible that some dirt got in where we put the pressure release valve in, and so we just want to make sure that can be flushed out. So we'll use this tap, we'll have it open when we first run the system, and any liquid in there will just get pushed out through here, and then any dirt will just get pushed out through here.